Sure. There I am.
Okay, it looks like you're all ready to go here.
Okay, good. So we'll call to order the City of Oxnard Planning Commission regular meeting for Thursday, June 18, 2020. Can we have roll call, please?
Chair Frank. Commissioner Chavez.
Here.
Commissioner Dozier.
Here.
Commissioner Meyer.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And can we have, Commissioner Meyer lead us in the pledge?
Certainly.
Ready?
Please place your right hand over your heart and repeat after me. Here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to item C, public comments on items not on our agenda. Do we have any public comment?
There are no public comments.
Okay. And no one on the phone, nothing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. We'll move to the consent agenda, the approval of our May 21.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
Just want to let you know that I'm here.
I
Robert
can
Sanchez.
see you. I can see you. Okay, so has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes of May 21, 2020? Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Who made the
Second.
motion? Who made the motion?
Chavez, move to. Ms. Chavez.
Second. Who seconded?
I seconded. Commissioner Meyer.
Understand. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we have roll call?
Commissioner Chavez.
Aye.
Commissioner Meyer.
Yes.
Commissioner Dozier.
Aye.
Vice Chair Sanchez.
Yes.
Chair Frank.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so our minutes are approved. Let's move on to, anyone have any ex parte communication on the agenda item we have this evening? I don't think
No.
so, because it's a city budget.
No.
Okay. So let's move on to item F1. This is updates to Oxnard City Code, chapters 11-15. It's a presentation by our planning department, and so I don't know who's going to put it on, what the order that they want to go in. So I'll just ask Mr. Colwitz.
Thank you, Chair Frank, for the introduction. This will be a team effort tonight. I'm joined by Kathleen Mallory as well as Isidro Figueroa here in the city chambers, and Chris Williamson is also joining us remotely. So, Michelle, if we could pull up the PowerPoint. Thank you. So the item that we have before the commission tonight is a zone text amendment that touches on several different topics. It's regarding our accessory dwelling units, our industrial code, and our cannabis regulations. We're going to be touching a few different portions of our code, specifically Chapter 11 and 16 with these actions tonight. And Michelle, if we could take the next slide. So at a high level, the project request is about accessory dwelling units, and you could see that there are several provisions within Chapter 16 that we're going to be touching, as well as the cannabis code. Thank you. That'll be touching several articles within Chapter 16 and 11. I'll get into these in a little bit more detail, but this is just to set the framework that there are various portions that we're touching. The overall objectives that we're looking at tonight, it's really a cleanup effort, if you will. The storytelling is that we had a number of different actions that were occurring simultaneously over a period of years, some led by the state, some led by local ordinances. And through the various items that had been adopted, there were unintentional and incorrect internal cross-referencing that occurred, as well as some state laws that have directed us to make some provisions and changes. So this effort really is just to clean those items up. We are not introducing anything new to our regulations, so we'll take you through the process here. So as far as the quick background, this list really identifies those competing actions that had happened over the years. In 2017 through 2019, there were various regulations both at the local level as well as the state level that changed our accessory dwelling unit regulations. In 2018 and 2019, there were various regulations that were passed relating to cannabis. In July of 2019, the central business district that was downtown had been replaced with a brand new downtown code. And again, in 2019, we comprehensively updated the industrial zones. All of these different sections had overlapping items, so that's what we're really trying to clean up today. So I'm going to start off with the accessory dwelling units discussion. After I'm done, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Kathleen Mallory to take us through the cannabis regulations, and then Isidro Figueroa will help us out with the industrial section to finish up this presentation to all of you. So as far as the background of second units, prior to 2017, the city of Oxnard did allow second units within the city, but it took an action of the Planning Commission through a special use permit. Along comes the state in 2017 and required us to modify our regulations to make it a by right use. So the code had been adopted, modified at that point in time, and the name of the second units changed to accessory dwelling units. And in particular, there's a citation here identifying the section in the Oxnard City Code that contains the accessory dwelling unit section. Along comes the state in 2019, and they adopted a whole bunch of new standards that we'll walk you through here. This slide gives you a little bit of a list, but we needed to find ways to take those items and fold it in with our regulations. And the general framework that we're taking is we've maintained our existing zoning that we have had adopted in 2017 and effectively feathered in the state regulations. The state gave us thou shalt language, so we're following those orders as of this point in time. As a pragmatic item, I do want to let the Planning Commission know that while we're only updating our code today, pragmatically we have been operating with the state's regulations in concert with our regulations since the beginning of this year. And then as we were looking at how to pragmatically implement these codes, we did have a work group with the design professionals that started meeting in January of this year. And it took a few months of us working side by side with them to try to figure out what's the easiest way to convey the message and the rules and regulations that we have locally as well as with the state. Those efforts really finished up late March, early April, and from that point forward, we jumped forward with amending the code language to reflect everything that we came up with. So to take you through the next step, this is a quick graphic that simply just shows you since 2018, since we've been permitting ADUs, where do they exist? So this is the various entitlements. It's scattered throughout the city, all within the inland zone. As far as the legislative packages that had been passed in 2018, 2019, these are the items that the state said we have to do. So we are allowing accessory dwelling units within all of the properties that contain single-family homes within the inland zone. And we also have a new thing called the junior ADU that the state created that we're allowing per this action. The state also provided a direction to us that not only do we have to allow ADUs within our single-family properties, but much to the surprise of many planning jurisdictions up and down the state, they introduced the concept of accessory dwelling units within multifamily structures. The multifamily structures, the elements that can be retrofitted effectively for accessory dwelling units are limited to areas that were non-habitable. So that could be an area that maybe used to house a boiler, for instance, that is no longer needed for heating purposes, but it's an existing space that perhaps could be large enough to contain an accessory dwelling unit. Or perhaps there's a large storage area that wasn't required by code. Something like that could be converted into an accessory dwelling unit. In addition, up to a quarter of garage spaces are allowed to be converted into accessory dwelling units, provided that replacement parking not within a garage is found elsewhere on the project site. There was direction by the state to reduce parking requirements for the accessory dwelling units. I will point out that the state's direction didn't differ from what the city of Oxnard previously had identified, so there's no net change for that particular provision. Item number 4 on this list is they removed the ability for local regulations to require an owner occupancy requirement. The city of Oxnard did have an owner occupancy requirement, so from the point that state law went into effect of January 1st of this year for the next 5 years, any ADUs that we permit cannot have that as a regulation. The code that we drafted for you tonight has the dates identified within it, and unless the state extends that, the owner occupancy provision would come back into our code. Number 5, there was a slight reduction to the side and the rear yard setbacks for ADUs. Number 6, there's an explicit prohibition of the city requiring additional open space or yard requirements. So that is slightly different from how we were looking at ADUs previously. And there's a there's an ability for us to, or limited ability for us to charge various development impact fees for the ADUs. In short, if an ADU comes in that's less than 750 square feet, we do not have an ability to collect development impact fees for those ADUs. A separate note that I wanted to point out is number 8. The state specifically prohibited ADUs from being used as short-term vacation rentals. In the documents that we provided to the Planning Commission tonight, you will not find that provision in these regulations, and that's because that has previously been adopted as part of our short-term vacation rental ordinance that you saw earlier this year. As far as the parking question, this is a quick map that shows the areas that are exempt from requiring ADU parking for ADU units. It's the green buffer is what you'll see. Specifically says parking is not going to be required for any ADU provided on those properties. What that means is the vast majority of the city will not have parking requirements for accessory dwelling units. As a pragmatic measure, when city staff does meet with our applicants for ADUs, we do talk to them about pragmatic considerations, how lots are going to be used, and we do make recommendations for how parking could be provided on site. But those are simply recommendations. We do not have an ability to regulate or require parking on site for the ADUs. For the underlying permitted use, we do have an ability to require that on site. So jumping forward, there's essentially 3 different ways that ADUs can now be provided on properties. One is to convert some type of existing structure, whether it's a garage or an accessory structure or part of an existing dwelling. Or perhaps there's an addition to an existing structure, or perhaps there's a brand new detached structure. All in all, as we worked with our design professionals at the start of this year, we identified a total of up to 9 different ADU types that might be feasible for someone to propose based on the state regulations and our prior codes. And we've come up with worksheets to identify what those various standards are. Essentially, we're trying to make this a by right sort of process, and I'll talk to you about what that means here in just one moment. So, but as far as the types of units that we're looking at, I'm going to fly through these fairly quickly without getting into all the standards, but if we need to come back and talk about any of the standards, we can do so. So type 1 in particular is a detached ADU. This is a pretty typical one that we would see in the backyard somewhere. This is a representational photograph of what that might look like. So it's a standalone structure that would be a living a unit for someone. Type 2A, the 2As, the type 2s in general are the conversion. So type 2A is the conversion of a detached accessory structure into an ADU. So that might look something like this. This could have been a workshop or some other sort of hobby room in a backyard that's now an ADU. A type 2B is a conversion of a primary garage. If this occurs, the spaces that were previously required in the garage still need to be provided on site, but they don't need to be covered. What we typically see in Oxnard examples is those garage spaces or those parking spaces within the garage would simply start parking on the driveway, would be the required space. And this would be a picture of a converted unit perhaps. The actual driveway to what would have been the garage here was converted to landscaping in this example, so there would have been parking on a different part of the property. A type 2C, this is an unusual one perhaps. This is when you take an existing structure that's not currently being used for a residential unit, so perhaps it was a store or an office. Zoning would allow for it to be converted into a residential unit. And then as part of that residential unit, someone would also propose an accessory dwelling unit in it at the same time. So in effect, you're creating a duplex structure. Previously, the Planning Commission reviewed a project that we called the Romero Duplex over on First Street. This was similar to that in terms of that project. It was a former carpet store that had been proposed to be turned into a residential unit with an accessory dwelling unit or two. Type 3, this is when you would add an addition onto a single family home, and the addition itself would be the ADU in and of itself. And typically we think of these as happening in the rear yard. So the structure on the left is that addition that's popping out of the home. But sometimes these also happen in the front of the property too. It's not limited to the backyard. It's just where would the setbacks allow the addition itself to occur. Type 4 is when you have essentially a large home and you would carve out part of that property to allow the ADU within it. This type of ADU allows the ADU to not exceed 50% of the overall size of the home. And we have a similar one, which is a type 5, which is the junior ADU. And the junior ADU still is a conversion of the interior space of a home, but there's a size limitation of up to 500 square feet for this one. So someone would have to look at maximum developable area per the regulations to determine if it's a type 4 or type 5. What's interesting about the type 5, the junior ADUs, is it requires a kitchenette, but it does not require a restroom. A restroom is an optional thing. If someone proposes a junior ADU that does not include a restroom, then there is a requirement that you have to have interior access to the main residential unit, and there's basically a shared bathroom inside the primary unit. We haven't had many of these being proposed, but we've had some requests about these, so it is garnering interest in the community. Excuse me. Type 6 is the brand new type altogether. This is the multifamily structure ADUs. And again, the notion that we're taking areas that were in a previous multifamily structure that were not being used as livable space, and we're now converting those to livable space. There is an ability to convert up to 25% of garages into ADUs, but in order to do that, someone has to be able to provide the replacement parking on site. And then type 7 is a combination of the various ADUs, really type 1 through type 5. Either a detached accessory structure, a converted structure of some sort, something within the primary unit where a developer or a homeowner can pick up to 2 of those and add those to the single-family home that was on site. So in essence, what's occurring is it allows single-family homes to now be, in effect, a triplex-like development. So the regulations that were provided to the state, since it came through many different bills, it was a little confusing. We worked with both the state as well as with our local design teams to figure out what these things meant and how it all worked together. And from that, we came up with a series of worksheets, and those are all posted online currently, and we also attached them to your staff report to give you an idea of what those look like. In effect, it's a checklist form. And how these work is someone would, when the city hall is open, they would come to the planning counter. They would share their plans with planning staff, and we would review their plans against this checklist and very simply be able to say yes or no in a binary format if they meet the regulations of a given ADU or not. If they do not, we identify what's off at that point in time, and they would go away and come back at a later point in time with the corrections. But if they do, then we simply stamp the permit with a zoning clearance stamp and allow them at that point in time to enter into the building and engineering department for plan check review. Once the ADU is submitted to plan check to building and engineering, there's a total of 60 days that building and engineering has to issue the permit for the ADU. And it's 60 days for the city having the file in hand, opposed to 60 days from when they first came and talked to us. And what that means is if someone came to us and provided an ADU application, we provided corrections to them, and they went away and came back on day 60 and asked for their permit, that's not how this would work. We would have 60 days for these plans being reviewed by the city to determine if it meets the standards, yes or no. If it meets our building standards, then we issue the permit, and if it doesn't, then the building department would have to deny the permit at that point in time. There's also another provision that staff talked with our building industry about, and essentially it was, well, there might be situations where someone has an ADU that wouldn't comply with all the standards that are included within our ordinance. They might have a lot that's extra large or some other characteristic that might merit special attention. And there was a request from the design community to essentially allow a voluntary process where someone could say, I'm not going to go through that 60-day permit clock process and the zone clearance process through plan check. I am voluntarily asking to submit a discretionary permit, a DDR permit, which is a director level permit, to make a case that I should be given special consideration for some other project that doesn't meet the strict standards. And we thought that that was reasonable. There could be a situation where a situation comes up that it would make sense for us to engage in that conversation. So the documents that are provided to the Planning Commission today does have that voluntary provision embedded within it. A couple other things that we wanted to point out for the Planning Commission is that nearly all of these ADUs that are being processed today and that have been processed previously in the city are all in the affordable price range. From what our surveys have showed us previously, many of the ADUs don't get any rent whatsoever because it's a family member is providing it as a living space for another member of their family. Where rents are charged, they're usually fairly low rents. And those units, all of those were able to account for in our RENA allocation. In addition, we've been in contact with the state about our current RENA process and have found out that indeed we will be able to continue counting both our ADUs and our junior ADUs as part of our RENA numbers. And as we looked at formulas to project forward how many ADUs we might be able to capture within RENA over the next housing cycle, based on the formulas HCD gave us, we're looking at about 2,000 units perhaps over that entire period. So we'll see if that comes to fruition, but that is a possibility in terms of the math. In terms of what we've experienced, this is a look back on prior permits. So between 2013 and 2016, very few ADUs were proposed. In 2017, that's where we saw the first the regulations switching over from the SUPs to the DDRs. And then in 2018 and 2019, we've gotten to a pretty regular flow for, sorry, not DDRs, the ADU applications. And as you look at this chart as it goes from left to right, you'll see the number of applications that were received, the number of entitlements that were granted, and eventually building permit issuance and maybe final occupancies that have been granted. As you look in 2019, there might be a slight bit of confusion as you look at, well, we only received 50 applications, but 55 entitlements were granted. How is that possible? And what that's a reflection of is permits that were previously asked for in 2018 were not approved in 2018, but then were approved in 2019. So there are more entitlements granted than applications received. As far as this year, in 2020, we revised our process to reflect what the state has asked for us. And as of yesterday, we've had a total of 57 applications submitted to us for various ADUs. And the vast majority of those had been submitted between March and as of yesterday. So what we're seeing in a pretty concrete fashion is the regulations have eased the requirements, and we are seeing an uptick in the number of 80 unit applications that are being proposed. And we will see throughout the year if we continue to get that acceleration of units. The 57 units itself, we further broke down into the type of ADUs that we have in our category classifications here. So what you'll see is we have a little bit of everything with the exception of the mixed types as of today. So there's interest in the community for this, and we'll continue to monitor this and be able to report this out to HCD as we move forward. And then just a brief one, I'm not going to go through this in detail whatsoever, but all the different regulations that we've discussed are all embedded in the draft ordinance that's attached to your Planning Commission resolution. So Exhibit A to the Planning Commission resolution is the draft ADU ordinance that we're presenting to you tonight. And if the Planning Commission follows the staff recommendation, that'll be something that we'll end up taking to the City Council in the near future. So with that, I'm going to hand over the microphone over to Kathleen Mallory to talk to us about cannabis and our cleanup process.
Hello, Commissioners. Nice to see you again. Kathleen Mallory, Planning and Sustainability Manager.
I'm sorry, my microphone was off. I would actually prefer, if you don't mind, to allow the commissioners to question or comment on the presentation that Mr. Kolwitz just did while his slides are in there and it's fresh in our minds since you're moving on to a different subject matter.
Certainly, we're here for you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions or comments on Mr. Kolwitz's presentation?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Dozier.
Yes, I just had one question. If you could state for the general public what the affordable price range is. You mentioned that a lot of the units were in the affordable part or being used or being built in homes that were in the affordable price range. So if you could just identify that amount for me, I appreciate it.
Commissioner Dozier, thank you for that question. It's not a number that I have readily off the top of my head. I may have some documents that I could dig up here quickly to give those ranges. So I'm happy to look for that. But it's also based on the number of, it could be potentially complicated because it's based on the number of persons within a household that might be in one of these units. And while I was sharing those words, I have my chart based on 2019, the various Ventura County income limits. So it's income limits opposed to rents. So
Okay.
an ADU, let's assume that these might have 2 people living in them, generally speaking. For our extremely low population, a household of 2 people would be $25,000. $25,150. For very low income, it would be an income of $41,850. For our lower income population, $67,000 even. And the median income for a 2-person household in Ventura County is $78,250. In practice, what we're seeing for the rents, again, a vast majority of these are charging no rents. So that would clearly fall within the extremely low rent category in terms of our RENA numbers.
Okay.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
okay, and if you could just make sure that that information is available to the public, I'd appreciate it. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners have questions? Okay, well, I have a couple of questions. On slide 10 and in your presentation, you say that there are 9 types of ADUs. But in the chart and the detail that you gave us, I only see 7.
That's correct. In terms of the types, there are 7, but type 2s, there are 3 different type 2s.
Oh, so you're counting those? Okay.
Correct.
Okay, counting those separate. I didn't understand. What happened at the June 15 IMCO and staff meeting?
So staff presented a very similar PowerPoint to our INCO executive board on Monday. And the INCO had some questions about, what are junior ADUs? Can you explain that a little bit more? And INCO board members asked questions about where are the ADUs and the parking requirements. It was questions of that nature, but no deliberations at all. We did provide a copy of the PowerPoint to all of them and notified them both of this meeting, as well as provided contact information if they wanted to, if they or any of their membership wanted to speak to you tonight as part of this public hearing process. So it was very much a file and receive action, but no deliberation.
Okay, well, I was just interested in, what was being presented and what the feedback was that you received.
Right.
So on this discretionary permit, where the discretion lies in the planning director, and that would be Mr. Lambert, right?
That's correct.
Can you tell me how many of those have been applied for in, let's say, 2019 and up until right now, like you told us, from March until now, you've had, what did you say, 43 applications or something?
Yeah, as of right now, we have not received a single DDR application for an ADU that exceeds the provision, and that's because that is not a standard that's yet in play. That's baked into this ordinance that's before the Planning Commission. So far, all of the ADU applications that we have received have complied with the various standards. So they're all fitting within one of these categories and complying with these standards.
Yeah, because the discretionary permit doesn't exist yet, right?
That's correct.
So when you have these forms and, they're pretty simple and pretty clear and very timely, a 60-day turnaround, I'm reluctant to throw the review out the window and leave it with a discretionary permit with one guy. I'm not understanding the real reason for that.
The conversations that staff had with our design professionals, as we started playing in the world of theoretical of what could occur on a particular site.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah. If the one that would come up would be something along the lines of, if there is a very large piece of property that exists, that has an existing single-family home on it today, and a property owner wanted to build an ADU on the back of it that was larger than the maximum size, if the site could accommodate it, should we allow a provision for that to occur? So for instance, there's a 1,200 square foot maximum is the size limitation that the state gave it to us. That is what's embedded into our code today. If someone wanted to propose, a 1,300 square foot ADU, technically we couldn't allow that today. There could be other examples in terms of
I mean, I'm just saying, even in the example you just gave me, you'd be in violation of state law. How can you give discretion to break the law to anyone?
It wouldn't be in violation of state law. State law played with the term minimum maximums.
Yeah,
So we can go larger than 1,200 square feet as far as a maximum, but we can't go less than 1,200 square feet as a maximum. So it wouldn't be in violation of state law. It just allows a provision for someone to potentially ask for that. What we've found talking to all of our applicants so far is the 60-day clock is a very exciting thing. So everyone is trying to modify their plans to fit it. We simply don't know if, as we played all the permutations out of what these different standards might be and what these units might be in individual lots, having a level of flexibility that someone can voluntarily enter into did make sense to staff.
yeah, it seems to me everyone would want that. Everyone would do that. Wow. Okay, now, this is just a little off topic, but you know I live at the beach, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can tell you that we have lots of type 4 ADUs down here already, even though they're not supposed to be in the coastal zone. Are there supposed to be permits for those?
Hi, this is Ken Rosell, the Chief Assistant City Attorney. The city has made the decision not to allow ADUs within the coastal zone because of the very limited amount of parking and the need to ensure that there is not so many people living at the beach that people who want to visit the beach will not have access. So,
Right.
So that is the position the city has taken. So any conversions at this point would be illegal and improper.
Okay, and what's the remedy?
I'm sorry, Chair Frank, I couldn't quite hear you.
What's the remedy? Remember in law school, we had the problem and then we had to have the remedy?
I apologize, I couldn't hear that word. Basically, if there are illegal conversions, you should contact code enforcement. The city will consider enforcement action.
Okay, thank you for that. Those are all the questions I have right now.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corwitz, for
Madam
accommodating
Chair?
me.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just had Commissioner Chavez with a few questions. And Mr. Kolowitz, quick question of just for clarification purposes, and maybe our city attorney can also assist with this. You had made a mention that when it comes to a conversion to a garage, that they still have to have parking in that garage or provide some other type of parking on the property, correct?
No, if the garage is being converted, they would not be providing parking within the garage, but they do need to provide the replacement parking on site. And it could be uncovered parking, it could be a new garage, it could be a carport potentially. What we typically see is uncovered parking.
Now, maybe you can clarify this. When I went up to Sacramento for that planning commissioner's training, this was one of those training sessions that we had was on the ADUs. And they were saying that property owners don't technically need to provide parking on site, but that street parking would be acceptable.
That's not the way that we understand the rules. The existing structures need to provide their required parking. The ADUs are technically required to provide their parking unless they meet certain provisions. And the provisions are on this slide here, identifying how close they are to various transit stops. If you are not exempted from providing your parking on site, then the ADU would need to provide their parking in addition to the primary unit on site. And Ken Roselle wishes to amend or add to my comments here.
No, I agree with your comments. I think if we're talking from a practical standpoint, however, the fact if you have let's say you have a single family dwelling with a garage, if you convert that garage, you would then have, you could potentially park those 2 cars in your driveway. But if the garage now has an ADU, they will also be driving. You may have 1 or 2 cars there. So from a practical standpoint, some of those cars, by definition, will have to go to the street. So technically, they're not counting the street parking as available, but because you are using the garage for living under that scenario, the cars by definition will have to go somewhere, and it will not be on the parking on that particular lot.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification because I know in older neighborhoods in South Oxnard, and particularly the Bryce Canyon North neighborhood, the alleyways, they're detached garages. There is no driveway for them, so street parking would be their only option. And Mr. Kolowitz, I appreciate you putting up this slide because I actually had questions in regards to this slide, and it kind of echoes the concerns from our Madam Chair when it comes to ADUs in the coastal area. Now, on this slide, it shows the buffer zone for GCTs, for Gold Coast Transit District bus stops, which are half-mile buffers, and it crosses the coastal zone line. Now, it was already mentioned that they are not allowed in coastal zone area along the beach. But referring back to the training that I received in Sacramento, when I asked that question, if the city or county had the ability to restrict where ADUs can be placed at, I was told no, the city cannot restrict where ADUs are placed at. So can you just clarify that? Maybe I misunderstood the speaker, but so I just want to get some clarification about that.
Absolutely. I'm happy to provide that answer to you. The issue that is there is that, yes, the state would prefer ADU in every zones. However, based on the current case law, what the courts have ruled that the local coastal plans are equal to the state law when it comes to density bonus and ADUs. So until the law is changed to indicate that our local coastal plan does not trump state law in this case, the city's current intention is to not amend the LCPs to allow ADUs. So the allowable density within the coastal zone would remain. So that we have had discussions with the Coastal Commission. They would like us to allow ADUs. At this point in time, staff has made the decision not to move forward with that, and there is no indication from the City Council that they want to move forward with ADUs in the coastal zone.
I appreciate that. And just one final comment. This map that shows the buffer zone, are these the most current and updated bus zones, stops that Gold Coast provides?
This is the best information that we have available. This map was created 2 days ago.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, staff.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Kolowitz.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Mallory, please join us.
Thank you, Commissioners. This evening, what we have before the Commission is to go over some cleanup measures. As Mr. Colwitz indicated, this does not create any new regulations. This is merely a cleanup. Over the course of the past two and a half years, we've adopted a series of ordinances, 3 or 4 different ones, and related to that is some internal cross-referencing cleanups that we need to bring before the Commission and then go to Council. So the first item is the reference to Chapter 11, and there's a provision that we had adopted before we even considered allowing cannabis, and that was to the sentence, retail sales of cannabis and cannabis products are not allowed. Obviously, through Council's action, we actually have adopted regulations to allow different types of cannabis. So our recommendation is to remove that statement from that provision noted. The additional one was in Section 11.468D, big D, I, lowercase b, where we actually had an incorrect reference, and that was, again, due to the course of adopting 4 different cannabis ordinances over time. And then Section 11.473B, this again, and this memorializes Council's action from December of 2017, where the action was to, December 2018, where the action was to allow in the downtown zone. And I'm going to fix that. I think it's actually December 2019. I'm just running through those years. There you go. And that was where we actually were implementing Council's action to allow cannabis retail uses only in the downtown core and downtown general zones. And that's, again, then we wanted to also cross-reference that same allowance into Chapter 16, which is our downtown code, 16.148. So, again, we are cross-referencing the allowance of cannabis retail in those 2 zones mentioned, DTC, downtown core, downtown general, in both Chapter 11 and Chapter 16. And the attachment before you this evening, Attachment A, shows how that would be reflected then in that in the downtown. The other item that we're addressing is there, as Mr. Colwitz indicated, we adopted a comprehensive update to our industrial code, and we had some code citation hiccups, and that is common when you are working with a publishing house and you don't always get the updated codes cross-referenced correctly by working with legal publishing companies. And this is to memorialize the allowance of different types of cannabis in the different industrial zones. And this is, again, consistent with Council's action through their approval of the Cannabis Manufacturing and Distribution Ordinance. So as the next table shows, we would then be adding cannabis as an allowed use with certain types of permits. So, for example, we'd be amending this this lovely table that is user-friendly to specify that testing requires a DDR, a Development Design Review permit, as well as manufacturing and distribution. And then retail would only be permitted in the area known as Business and Research Park, or BRP, through approval of a special use permit. So that then also that table would cross-reference interested parties to Chapter 11 so that they could go in and get further information on the specifics regarding what we're doing in terms of cannabis and how the permits would be. I'm going to turn it over here to Isidro. I'm going back the wrong way. Why don't you? There you go. Thank you. Exactly opposite, right?
Good evening, Commissioners. I'll try to be brief on my presentation. There are not that many changes to the industrial zones ordinance. They typically consist of correcting topographical errors, which leads us to the first section, which is the development standards section. The changes to this section consist of minor typographical corrections, directing the reader to the special requirements section for further direction pertaining to setback requirements in all industrial zones except BRP. The next set of updates is to the special requirements section. Here we're replacing the word conditional to special in reference to a use permit to ensure clarity. Making changes to make sure we're correcting citations. Replace commission with planning commission to ensure clarity. In the light industrial, the M1 zone, the existing front yard setback requirement is a duplication of the side yard setback. So staff recommends reverting to the previous M1 front yard setback and incorporate the 2030 general plan policy view corridor preservation standard. Continuing with the light industrial section, changes primarily consist of correcting citations and replacing commission with planning commission to ensure clarity. In the heavy industrial area, the M2, the setback discussion is missing numerical heading, so we're fixing that, and also making some modifications to the formatting. Section 16-165F identifies a requirement for outdoor equipment and storage areas in the heavy industrial zone, which will be deleted since the requirement is already identified under a separate section. Concluding with the heavy industrial zone, staff recommends replacing commission with planning commission and correct a sequential error. Concluding with the industrial zone updates, this is to the cannabis permit section. The changes to this section consist of amending the title to correct typographical errors. Staff recommends deleting development design and add as to permit to indicate that multiple permits are required for commercial cannabis activities. Make topographical corrections consisting of capitalizing all industrial zones and including abbreviations to those zones. Capitalize article in reference to Article 17 and incorporate the word review after the words development design to clearly indicate that a DDR permit is required. The proposed amendments, both to all the ADU, to the cannabis, and to the industrial zone changes, they were all reviewed in accordance with the California Public Resources Code and CEQA. Staff found the proposed amendments to be exempt. The basis of the exemptions were that the proposed amendments are regulatory and format related. The amendments would not permit new activities or development intensity over what is allowed by current regulations and are proposed to create consistency with state statutes. Staff wants to provide the commission with a roadmap of the Planning Commission resolution. The resolution itself contains a recommendation to the City Council. Within that resolution, there are two exhibits. Exhibit A is the draft ADU ordinance containing all the proposed changes. Exhibit B, the draft cannabis and industrial ordinance, contains all the changes plus an attachment, the downtown code use table. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission find the project exempt from CEQA and the Public Resource Code section based on the reference statutes, and that the Planning Commission adopt resolution 2020, adopt a resolution recommending City Council approval of PC numbers 20-58001, 03, and 04, amending Chapter 16 of the City Code to create consistency with the accessory dwelling unit state law, Chapter 16, Division 10, downtown zones, and Division 11, industrial zones of the City Code to create typographical errors and to incorporate commercial cannabis activities into the zone use tables, and to amend Chapter 11 of the City Code related to cannabis uses. This concludes staff's presentation. Staff is available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Am I on here? Yes. Okay, commissioners, any questions or comments? Anyone? Okay, I don't hear anybody. So, I don't have any questions. So, thank you very much. Is there anything else that we're supposed to hear before we move forward? Hello? No. Okay. Do we have a motion?
This is
Chair?
I'm sorry. Yes, Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you, Chair Frank. I did have a comment regarding the industrial land use matrix that was included in the was part of the exhibits with the ordinance.
Yes.
I wanted to just share that I found it a little challenging to follow that table because it didn't have headings after the first page, and it had quite a few pages. And so following which zone is referenced in the table was difficult. So what I would suggest would be perhaps to include part of the heading that's on the first page in the subsequent pages. That's all.
Okay. Commissioner Dozier, did you have a comment? No? Okay, anyone else? All right, thank you, everyone. So, anyone want to make a motion?
Chavez make the recommended, move the recommended action.
Thank you very much. I'll second. Can we have roll call, please? We have a motion by Chavez and a second by Frank.
Commissioner Chavez,
Aye.
Chair Frank,
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer,
Yes.
Commissioner Dozier,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. That was actually very interesting. All right, we'll move to item G on our agenda, study session or reports. Do we have any? I don't think we have any. We'll move to item H, Planning Commission business. Mr. Kolwitz, you want to update us on anything?
I was going to wait for item I, the community development staff updates.
All right,
Item H is really for planning commissioners if they have anything to share with each other or
right.
us.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, anyone have any business?
Madam Chair, I'll just make a quick comment, just to say thank you to staff for breaking up the pages with the little tabs. That was very helpful to keep everything in perspective. So thank you, staff, for listening to our comments from our last meeting and following through with that. That's all.
I totally agree with that. Well, the only business I have is the hell that we're going through down at the beach. Many of you may not have heard that last weekend we had a group of 500. We think they are high school students that congregated in the dunes in front of the Oxnard Beach Park. This event was advertised on social media. I got this from the police, by the way. 500 kids. They were shooting off fireworks. They had a bonfire, and there was alcohol. My neighbors advised me that they made 30 phone calls to the police. The police finally came. It took 20 Oxnard PD officers to disperse this group. It was extremely disruptive, not only to the neighbors who lived right in the adjacent streets and ways, but I lived down toward the center of Oxnard Shores, and we could all hear these fireworks. It was absolutely awful. The short-term vacation rentals down here are packed. They're packed. I can't even describe it. Cars in curb cuts, cars everywhere, cars on Capri, over the white lines, you can't get through. The trash cans are out. I mean, this has really turned out to be awful. And I think the publicity in the LA Times about take a drive vacation, go somewhere where you can drive, you don't have to fly. So, I mean, we're talking massive groups of people congregating down here at the beach. I see hardly any masks. I know every neighborhood is just inundated with fireworks, but we're having an exceptionally loud start to our summer down here. So I don't know the answer, but I'm just bringing it up because the quality of life, I think, in Oxnard is diminishing by allowing a lot of this activity. The neighborhoods are being disrupted. So it's concerning to me. So anyway, that was my business. Thank you for listening. We can move on to community development staff updates.
Thank you, Chair Frank, for that. Both Kathleen, Mallory, and I have some items to share with you. I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Kathleen. So in terms of recent actions, I want to let all of you know that this past Tuesday, June 16th, the City Council met and reviewed the Sakioka Farms development agreement, the map, and the road naming. And by unanimous vote, they went along with your unanimous recommendation. So that project was approved on Tuesday. The development agreement, we still need to take that back to the City Council for a second reading, and we're working with the applicant team on their final map. But that project is moving forward. So thank you for all of your hard work on lifting that one up, and the City Council heard you. So thank you. Looking forward, there's two quick things to share with you. The Coastal Commission, we have a potential date for the STR regulations. We don't have a specific date, but they're targeting their July hearing. Their July hearing is over a course of days, July 8th through the 10th. So as we figure out when that is, we'll share it with you. And
where would that meeting be?
It's going to be a virtual meeting, but July 8th through 10th.
Okay.
And the only other item that I have to share with you is your next meeting. We will hold one on July 2nd. It should be, there's only one public hearing item on it. It's an alcohol special use permit. Those generally go fairly quickly, so I'll let you plan your evenings accordingly. So,
well, then let me ask you then, why have it?
As part of our facilitation of businesses, we're trying to get their permits so they can get up and running. We have a number of businesses that are trying to start even in this age of COVID, and this is one way to help them facilitate their process. Even for existing businesses that want to add a new function, this allows them to keep moving forward with their business plan.
And we couldn't have heard that tonight?
We weren't ready for it for tonight,
Okay.
but July 2nd.
Okay, I'm just looking at, the economics of having a full-blown meeting for an alcohol permit. Not that an alcohol permit isn't important, but I was hoping it could be consolidated with something else, just for efficiency.
Yeah. When we can, we try to do so.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Kolwitz?
That's everything for me, but I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen Mallory to share some program updates with you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, Commissioners. I just wanted to give you some updates on some exciting things that we are working on that you'll be seeing and hearing about. The first is our climate action plan. We've kicked that off, our climate action and adaptation plan. We're starting the community engagement process. That's about a 18 to 20 month process. As you can imagine, we have some new thinking we have to do in terms of engagement. So we're kicking off those efforts and thinking through ways to get robust community input. The other item is our housing element. That's another item that is has kicked off. We are meeting with different housing advocacy groups. We have planned to bring before one of our committees in early September some key housing policy questions that will help to us make decisions as we work with our housing element consultant to put together the housing programs, site inventory. The housing element in draft form has to be submitted to HCD in around March, which is quickly approaching, with the final housing element having to be in place by early October. We typically we've found that we're actually ahead of the curve because we've done two we've done a housing element in 2016, and then we also did a mid-cycle housing element. So we're in very good shape with what we're doing. And also, we've been in deep conversations with HCD about the status of our programs. So that is good news. The other two items are programmatic monies. And that means this is formula funds for grants where we get the money outright, which is exciting. One is SB2, and that's $625,000 of money. We've received the money, and it's for 3 specific programs that lead to policy and housing element work. One is that we're doing an infrastructure study to look at infrastructure capacity related to some of the things you've heard tonight in terms of ADUs and JADUs, and also some infrastructure capacity analysis for downtown. And that will help us know where we need to condition and upgrade improvements and upgrade infrastructure, and then impose those as conditions or program it through our capital improvement plan. The other SB2 fund is an issue of updating some sections of our housing element. I'm sorry, some sections of our development code to facilitate housing. And additionally, there's also another grant that we are putting together that we just submitted, and that's called the Local Early Action Plan Grant, or LEAP, we call it. And that's formula money as well, which is $500,000 of money to go for 2 specific programs, again, really related to housing. Most of the money from the state is to facilitate housing, streamline housing, but also look at the sustainable components, look at the environmental impacts of housing and the connections between housing and transit, all the things that also relate to climate planning. The 2 projects that we have submitted for $500,000, one is a corridor study down Oxnard Boulevard, Saviors Road. It's looking at housing and transit and the connections between those 2 elements, and that, again, also feeds into our housing element update. And then also the second project that we will, and this is formula money, so we know we will be getting it. The second is for our environmental document for our housing element update, which we will then be able to have monies to program for that. So those are just updates, all things housing, sustainability, and climate, and happy to answer any questions you have on that. I wanted to give you that update since I'm here this evening. It's nice to see all of you as well.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm glad you're getting that money. That's great. Good outreach. All right. Commissioners, any comments or questions? All right, then we'll stand. I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Chair.
Okay.
Thank
you. Beat it by a second.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to commend staff for the presentation on the ADUs. Being able to see visually the different types of ADUs was really helpful. And having that explanation of the process, because the staff report was fairly dry, and so that helped my understanding quite a bit. That's all. Thank you.
All right. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Have a great evening.